Have you ever wondered if an equation can kill? Not through miscalculation, but by revealing something that shouldn't be known. I didn't believe it either, until I received an envelope with no return address, containing a formula that seemed alive. Since then, my life has ceased to be a logical sequence and has become a labyrinth of symbols, secrets, and decisions that no one should have to make. The case began with the death of a brilliant mathematician, found in a locked room next to an impossible equation. But what seemed to be merely an academic mystery soon revealed itself to be a dangerous mental game, where each clue led to an ethical dilemma, and each answer concealed a new question. What had he discovered? And why did someone want to silence him? This investigation took me to places that logic can't reach. Encounters with people who knew too much, documents that shouldn't exist, and a truth that perhaps is better left buried. But when you start to decipher what's behind the numbers, you realize that the biggest enigma isn't in the equation, it's in who wrote it, and in what they wanted to hide. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching this video from? I want to know if I've been investigating around here before, or if perhaps the next case is closer than you think. I was never a big fan of universities. They always seemed to me like temples of logic, where mystery is suffocated by formulas and certainties. But that morning, as I crossed the gates of St. Elric University, I felt that something was out of place. The silence was dense, as if the corridors held secrets that even books dared not tell. And it was there that I met the name that would change everything: Arthur Lemaitre. Lemaitre was not just a mathematician. They said he saw patterns where others saw chaos, that he conversed with numbers as if reading minds. His office was on the top floor of the East Wing, surrounded by tall windows and piles of ancient manuscripts. His fame transcended borders, but his personal life was an enigma in itself. Reclusive, eccentric, and with a gaze that always seemed to be calculating something invisible. The university revered him, but also feared him. Some colleagues avoided talking about him, as if there were a silent pact about what could or could not be said. Rumors circulated through the corridors, about secret research, an equation that no one could solve, and a growing paranoia that alienated him from everyone. It was in this climate of veiled tension that I received the call. Lemaitre was dead. The news hit like a bomb. Not because of the death itself, but because of what it left behind. A blackboard with an impossible equation, a room locked from the inside, and a legacy shrouded in mystery. I knew it wouldn't be a common case. And as I climbed the stairs to examine the place, one question hammered in my mind. What exactly was Lemaitre trying to prove? It was just another Tuesday when I received the envelope. No return address, no stamp, just my name handwritten in a firm handwriting that was too firm to be casual. Inside, a sheet of paper folded in four, with an equation that looked like it came straight out of a mathematical nightmare. And a sentence that sent chills down my spine: solve this, or others will die. It wasn't a challenge, it was a threat. I'm not a mathematician, but I've learned to respect the codes the world tries to hide. That equation didn't make sense at first glance, but there was something about it that called to me. As if each symbol screamed for attention, as if there were a hidden logic waiting to be deciphered. And the strangest thing, the writing style reminded me of someone. Someone I thought I'd never see again. Arthur Lemaitre. The name came like a whisper in my mind. A brilliant, reclusive mathematician with a mind that flirted with the impossible. I met him years ago at a conference where he presented a theory that no one could refute or understand. Since then, he disappeared from the radar. Until now. The equation seemed like a signature. And the timing was too perfect to be a coincidence. I decided to go to St. Elric University, where Lemaitre used to teach. Something told me that the answer wasn't just in the numbers, but in the subtext of the life he left behind. And as I drove there, a question accompanied me like an invisible passenger. Who else knew this equation? And why did it come to me? Lemaitre's body was found in his office, locked from the inside. No sign of a struggle, no visible injuries. Just him, slumped beside the blackboard, as if he had fainted before his own creation. On the board, a handwritten equation, with firm and urgent strokes. It was as if he had tried to leave something behind before departing. Something that wasn't just mathematics. The equation didn't follow any known pattern. It mixed classic symbols with markings that seemed invented, as if he had created a new language. Colleagues who saw it said it was impossible to solve, but I wasn't there to solve it, I was there to understand. And understanding sometimes requires more than logic. It requires listening to the silence that numbers leave behind. The strangest thing was the atmosphere. The room was immaculate, except for one detail. The clock on the wall had stopped at 3:17 a.m. And the teacup on the table was still warm when the security guards arrived. This indicated that the death was recent, but no one saw or heard anything. How can someone die in a locked room, leaving no trace, and still manage to write an impossible equation? I began to suspect that the equation wasn't just a mathematical problem. Perhaps it was a code, a message, a cry for help disguised as a challenge. And if that were the case, why would Lemaitre choose that format? Why not write a letter or leave a video? The answer, I suspected, lay hidden in the mind of someone who thought differently from all of us. Arthur Lemaitre was the kind of man who seemed to live in another dimension. Not out of arrogance, but out of sheer immersion in the world of numbers. He spoke little, but when he did, he left everyone disconcerted, as if each sentence were a disguised equation. His colleagues admired him, but also avoided him. They said he could see patterns even in people's emotional chaos. What intrigued me most was his obsession with enigmas. Lemaitre didn't solve problems, he created them. He challenged students with seemingly unsolvable questions, and when someone came close, he changed the rules. It was as if he were testing the limits of the human mind. And perhaps, without realizing it, he was testing his own. His personal life was a labyrinth. He never married, had no children, and was rarely seen outside the university. He lived in a small apartment, surrounded by books and boards with scribbled formulas. A neighbor told me that he talked to himself, sometimes in languages no one recognized. This made me wonder, was Lemaitre trying to communicate with something beyond us? The most curious thing was his gaze in the photos. Always fixed, as if he were seeing something that others couldn't. It wasn't fear, nor sadness, it was calculation. As if he were measuring time, space, or perhaps death itself. And if he knew something was about to happen, why didn't he try to stop it? Or perhaps, in some way, he wanted it to happen. The equation on the board wasn't just complex, it was strange. There were symbols that didn't belong to traditional mathematics, as if Lemaitre had invented a new way of writing. One looked like a cut spiral, another resembled a distorted Greek letter. It wasn't just calculation, it was code. And codes, I learned, always have a hidden purpose. I took a picture of the blackboard and started comparing it to old manuscripts by Lemaitre. In one of them, I found a similar symbol, used as a signature in an unpublished article. The article was about emotional mathematics, a concept that mixed logic with human behavior. It was as if he was trying to translate feelings into formulas. And that unsettled me. If Lemaitre was trying to communicate something through the equation, perhaps he was asking for help. Or leaving a warning. The problem is that no one seemed to understand what he meant. The professors who analyzed the painting said it was a provocation, a final challenge. But I didn't believe in symbolic farewells. This had real weight, almost urgent. I began to suspect that the symbols weren't there by chance. Perhaps they were part of a larger pattern, scattered throughout his writings, like pieces of a puzzle. And if that were the case, where were the other pieces? Who else would have access to them? The answer, I suspected, lay with someone who knew Lemaitre intimately. Someone who knew how to decipher what he never said aloud. Lemaitre's office seemed frozen in time. The door was locked from the inside, with no signs of forced entry, as if he had voluntarily isolated himself. The window was ajar, but there were no marks of entry or exit. The clock, stopped at 3:17 a.m., caught my attention, not because it was broken, but because it was perfectly synchronized with the moment of death. It was as if time had been interrupted. The teacup on the table still exuded a faint aroma of chamomile. This indicated that he hadn't expected to die. He was in the midst of an ordinary routine. Next to the cup, an open notebook with incomplete notes, as if it had been interrupted mid-sentence. The equation on the board seemed to have been written hastily, but precisely. And there was something strange about the arrangement of the objects. No sign of a struggle, no paper out of place, no trace of forced entry. It was as if death had occurred silently, almost respectfully. But what bothered me was the absence of fingerprints in obvious places. Doorknob, pen, cup. Everything too clean. And Lemaitre wasn't the meticulous type when it came to cleanliness. This made me wonder, had anyone been there after death? I started photographing everything, every detail, every shadow. The light coming through the window created curious patterns on the floor, as if drawing something I couldn't yet see. And while observing the painting, I realized that the equation was positioned to be seen from the door, not from the table. As if it had been written for someone who would enter. But who? And why? 3 names emerged almost immediately. The first was Professor Harold Voss, Lemaitre's colleague and eternal academic rival. Voss constantly tried to prove Lemaitre wrong, but never succeeded. The second was Clara Nunes, a brilliant former student who had a public falling out with him months before. And the third, the most curious, was Lemaitre's personal assistant, who simply disappeared after the crime. Harold Voss was the kind of man who smiled with his teeth, but not with his eyes. When I interviewed him, he seemed more relieved than sad. He said that Lemaitre was losing control, and that his latest research was a dangerous joke. Clara, on the other hand, was visibly shaken. She spoke affectionately, but also with contained anger. There was something unresolved between the two of them. The assistant, named Lucas, was young, intelligent, and ambitious. He had complete access to the office, the notebooks, the digital files. But nobody knew where he was. His cell phone was off, and his apartment seemed hastily abandoned. That bothered me. People don't disappear without a reason. And when they disappear right after a mysterious death, it's because they know more than they should. I began to assemble a psychological profile of each one. Voss had a wounded ego, Clara harbored deep resentments, and Lucas was afraid. Afraid of something that was perhaps beyond common comprehension. And if Lemaitre trusted him, why would he run away? Or perhaps he didn't run away. Was he silenced? The answer, I knew, lay in some detail I hadn't yet noticed. The equation left by Lemaitre wasn't just complex, it was provocative. It seemed to challenge anyone who looked at it, as if to say, "You're not ready." I spent hours trying to understand its structure, but the more I looked, the more it transformed. It was like a labyrinth that changed shape as you progressed. And then I realized, it wasn't meant to be solved, it was meant to be deciphered. While researching through old archives, I found references to a lost theorem that Lemaitre mentioned in personal letters. He believed that certain mathematical patterns could reveal hidden truths about human behavior. A kind of bridge between logic and emotion. This made me think, what if the equation were a key? A way to unlock something that wasn't physical, but mental? I spoke with a cryptography expert who told me something curious. The equation had a cipher structure. It wasn't just calculation, it was an encoded message. That changed everything. If Lemaitre had encoded something there, what was he trying to hide? Or worse, what was he trying to protect? The feeling was that I was meddling with something that shouldn't be touched. Lemaitre's ancient texts. Each symbol seemed to echo something in some article, a subtle repetition, as if he had been constructing this enigma for years. And if that were true, then this equation was the pinnacle of his work. But why deliver it at the moment of his death? And why to me? Clara Nunez greeted me with red eyes and a choked voice. She said that Lemaitre was more than a mentor. He was a distorted mirror of everything she wanted to be. But there were resentments. A project she developed was rejected by him without explanation, and since then, the two had drifted apart. She was crying, but there was something in the way she looked away that put me on alert. Pain and guilt often go hand in hand. As we talked, I realized Clara knew more than she was letting on. She mentioned the equation even before I showed her the photo. She said Lemaitre had been working on it for years, but that in recent months he seemed paranoid. He talked about irreversible consequences, and truths that shouldn't be revealed. This made me wonder, had he discovered something that frightened him? Clara showed me an old notebook, with notes that seemed like preliminary steps to the final equation. There were scribbles, disjointed phrases, and a note in red, "If anyone understands this, they will no longer be safe." That gave me chills. Clara said she tried to convince him to stop, but he was obsessed. And when obsession meets fear, the result is never simple. As I left her apartment, I felt a strange weight. It wasn't just the case, it was the feeling of entering something bigger than I could control. Clara looked at me through the window, as if she wanted to say something she didn't have the courage to. And in that instant, I realized that the next step in the investigation wouldn't just be logical. It would be emotional. And perhaps, dangerous. Lemaitre's notebooks, an old memory flashed through my mind. Years ago, I investigated the disappearance of a mathematician named Dr. Errico Salazar. He had published an article on intuitive mathematics, and vanished days later without a trace. The case was never solved, but there was something about that article that bothered me. And now, reviewing Lemaitre's writings, I saw echoes of the same theory. Salazar believed that certain numerical patterns could predict future events. Not as prophecies, but as extreme probabilities. Lemaitre seemed to have followed this line of thought, but with more depth and more fear. On one page, he quoted Salazar directly, as if continuing his work. This made me wonder, were the two connected by something greater? I rummaged through my old files and found a letter Salazar had sent to a colleague, mentioning the final equation. The same expression Lemaitre used in one of his notebooks. It was as if both were chasing the same mathematical ghost. And if Salazar disappeared because of it, what happened to Lemaitre may not have been an accident. It may have been a consequence. These flashbacks began to disturb me. It wasn't just an investigation. It was a repetition. A pattern. As if I were trapped in a cycle that began long before me. And if this cycle was about to close, what would come next? The answer, perhaps, lay in something Lemaitre saw, something Salazar tried to warn about, but no one wanted to listen. Lemaitre's personal files. I found a diary hidden behind a false bookcase. It was small, hardcover, with yellowed pages and nervous handwriting. In it, he spoke of persecution. He said he was being watched, that his ideas were bothering powerful people. And he mentioned something that made me stop, a secret society of dissident mathematicians. The name was strange, Ordo Sigma. I had never heard of it, but Lemaitre seemed obsessed. He wrote that they believed certain knowledge should remain hidden, away from the public. That the equation he was developing could disrupt the balance. This made me wonder, was he trying to protect the world from his own discovery? The diary also contained drawings, mind maps, and a list of names, some crossed out, others circled. Clara was among them. Voss too. And Lucas, the assistant, had a note next to him, reliable but vulnerable. This put me on alert. If Lemaitre distrusted everyone, why did he still maintain contact with them? Or perhaps he had no choice. The last page of the diary was torn, but a passage was still legible. If I fall, let the equation speak for me. That gave me chills. It was as if he knew he wouldn't get out of this alive. And if the equation was his testament, then each symbol carried more than logic. It carried fear, urgency, and perhaps a truth that someone was willing to kill to hide. In the very first days of the investigation, I realized that the university didn't want a scandal. The rector received me with excessive formality, trying to close the case as a natural death. He said that Lemaitre suffered from chronic stress, that he may have had a breakdown. But nothing in the scenario pointed to that. And when I tried to access the professor's digital files, I encountered unexpected blocks. I requested access to the internal servers, but received an almost immediate denial. They cited academic security protocol, which, translated, means, we're hiding something. I spoke with some employees, and they all seemed nervous. One of them told me, in a low voice, that Lemaitre had argued with the board days before he died. The reason? An article he wanted to publish that was censored. The feeling was that I was being watched. My footsteps echoed louder than they should in the hallways. Emails I sent took a long time to be answered, or arrived with sections deleted. It was as if the institution itself was trying to erase Lemaitre's traces. But why? What was in that equation that justified so much effort to silence me? I decided to go my own way. If the university wanted to stop me, I needed to find someone willing to talk. Someone who wasn't afraid of losing their job or reputation. And as I was leaving campus, I received an anonymous message on my cell phone. You're closer than you think. But be careful, some numbers shouldn't be added together. It was official. I was causing trouble. It was on a rainy night that Lucas reappeared. He called me from an unknown number and asked to meet me at a secluded cafe, far from the university. He was pale, with deep dark circles under his eyes and trembling hands. He said he couldn't trust anyone, that Lemaitre had discovered something that shouldn't exist. And that the equation wasn't a problem, it was an answer. According to Lucas, Lemaitre had solved the equation days before he died. But upon understanding what it revealed, he panicked. He began deleting files, hiding notebooks, and avoiding any contact. Lucas tried to convince him to publish, but Lemaitre said that the world isn't ready. This made me think, what could be so dangerous that even a genius prefers silence? Lucas handed me a flash drive with encrypted files. He said it contained the final version of the equation, along with notes explaining its meaning. But there was a warning, if you open this, there's no going back. That left me conflicted. I wanted answers, but I also knew that some doors, once opened, cannot be closed. And perhaps this was one of them. Before leaving, Lucas looked at me with an expression that mixed relief and fear. He said he wouldn't go back to the university, that he needed to disappear. And as he walked away in the rain, I realized the investigation had changed direction. It was no longer about who killed Lemaitre. It was about what he had discovered. And about what that discovery could cause. I began to profile who might have committed the crime, if it was indeed a crime. The equation, the silence, Lucas's disappearance, everything pointed to someone with above-average intelligence. Someone who doesn't act on impulse, but on conviction. A rare type, the ideological assassin. The one who believes they are doing the right thing, even if it means eliminating anyone who threatens their beliefs. This type of mind is not driven by money, nor by revenge. It is driven by purpose. And the purpose, in this case, seemed to be to protect knowledge that should not be revealed. The idea that certain knowledge is dangerous is not new. But to kill for it? That requires a cold, calculating mind, and at the same time, a deeply convinced one. A rare and frightening combination. Reviewing the patterns, I realized that the assassin didn't want to erase Lemaitre. He wanted to erase what he knew. The equation was the target, not the man. That changes everything. Because if the crime was committed to protect an idea, then we're dealing with someone who believes they're saving the world. And when someone sees themselves as a hero, they don't consider the consequences. That makes everything more unpredictable. I began to look for signs of obsessive behavior among the suspects. Voss had the ego, Clara had the pain, Lucas had the fear. But there was a fourth shadow looming over the case, someone who didn't appear in the records, but whom Lemaitre mentioned in code. A name that surfaced in scribbled notes, as if he were trying to hide and at the same time warn. Who was this hidden figure? With the flash drive in hand, I began to decipher the files Lucas had given me. They weren't just formulas, they were hidden messages within academic articles, as if Lemaitre were conversing with someone through mathematics. Each symbol of the equation appeared in different texts, in seemingly random contexts. But when connected, they revealed a sequence. A pattern. A code. I used reverse encryption software and discovered that the articles formed a kind of hidden narrative. They spoke of decisions, sacrifices, and a door that must not be opened. It was as if Lemaitre was trying to warn someone, or perhaps leave instructions for those who came after. The equation was the key, and the articles, the map. And I was following each step, even without knowing the destination. Some messages were more direct. One said, "If you've made it this far, you're already involved." Another, "Knowledge is a blade, too sharp for unprepared hands." That made me stop. Lemaitre wasn't just hiding something. He was testing anyone who tried to find out. And if I failed, what would happen? The code wasn't just an intellectual challenge. It was a filter. I continued deciphering, and I realized that the texts led to a specific location, an underground library, mentioned in a 1998 article. A place where Lemaitre kept his most dangerous manuscripts. And if all this was true, then the next step wasn't just to investigate, it was to enter. But enter where? And with what kind of protection against what I might find? With the flash drive in hand and the messages deciphered, I began to feel the weight of the choice. Revealing everything meant exposing a truth that Lemaitre tried to hide, perhaps for good reasons. But hiding it meant condoning the silence that had already cost a life. I'm not a mathematician, but I understand dilemmas. And this was one of the deepest I've ever faced. What is more valuable, truth or security? I spent sleepless nights rereading the files, trying to understand the impact of the equation. It didn't predict the future, but it showed patterns that could be used to manipulate human decisions. It was like a map of the collective mind. And if it fell into the wrong hands, it could be used to control, not to liberate. Lemaitre knew this. And perhaps that's why he preferred to die with the secret. I spoke with Clara again. She said that Lemaitre believed that knowledge should be shared, but responsibly. That he was torn between publishing and protecting. And that, in his final days, he seemed to have chosen sacrifice. That touched me. Because sometimes, protecting the world means carrying a weight that no one sees. And perhaps that weight was now mine. As I walked through the city, observing unfamiliar faces, I wondered, what if someone already had access to the equation? What if what Lemaitre tried to prevent was already in motion? His silence may have been a shield, but it may also have been too late. And if it's too late, what's left for me? To reveal, to hide, or to find a third way? The underground library lay beneath the university's old auditorium, a place few knew existed. Clara guided me there, using a key Lemaitre had given her years ago, for when the time called for it. We descended a narrow staircase, enveloped in a silence that seemed to weigh heavier with each step. The air was thick, heavy with dust and memories. And there, among forgotten shelves, lay Lemaitre's last writings. The notebooks were arranged in a precise sequence, as if he knew someone was coming. Each volume contained a part of the equation, accompanied by philosophical reflections and ethical dilemmas. It was more than mathematics. It was a treatise on the power of knowledge. And in the last notebook, a phrase written in red, "Truth does not liberate, it demands." That hit me like a punch. As I was reading, I realized someone was watching us. A figure appeared between the shelves, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. It was Harold Voss. He was holding an envelope and had a look that mixed anger and relief. He said that Lemaitre had trusted him, but then excluded him from the project. That he tried to prevent the publication, but couldn't. And that now, everything depended on me. I confronted Voss right there, amidst the books and secrets. He denied nothing. He said that Lemaitre was playing with forces that no one should touch. That the equation could be used to predict mass decisions, manipulate behavior, control societies. And that, therefore, he needed to be silenced. But was Voss telling the truth? Or was he merely trying to justify the unforgivable? Lemaitre's last notebook, I realized that the equation wasn't just a formula, it was a confession. Each symbol, each variable, represented a moment, a choice, a pain. He had codified his own trajectory, his fears, his losses. It was as if he had left a mathematical diary, where each number told a part of the story. And at the center of it all, a revelation. The equation, when fully deciphered, revealed a pattern of events culminating in his death. Not by chance, but by design. Lemaitre knew he would be silenced, and he used the equation as a witness. A code that only someone with patience and empathy could understand. He didn't want revenge. He wanted understanding. And perhaps, redemption. It was a calculated farewell. The most surprising thing was discovering that he had left instructions for me. In an envelope hidden among the notebooks, there was a letter. "John, if you've made it this far, it's because you've seen what nobody else wanted to see. Protect what needs to be protected. And remember, not all truth needs to be told." That dismantled me. It wasn't just an investigation. It was a passing of the baton. I left the library with the equation in hand, but without definitive answers. The mystery had been solved, but its impact still echoed. Lemaitre didn't die by mistake, he died by choice. And now, what to do with what he left behind? The equation was with me. But was I ready to carry what it meant? As I returned home, with the equation stored in a sealed envelope, I felt a different kind of silence. It wasn't the silence of absence, but the silence of understanding. Lemaitre didn't want to be remembered as a martyr, nor as a genius. He wanted to be forgotten, perhaps, or remembered only by those who understood that knowledge has limits. And that surpassing them requires more than courage, it requires responsibility. I thought of all the faces I saw during the investigation. Clara, Lucas, Voss. Each one carried a part of the story, a version of the same enigma. But no one had all the pieces. Not even Lemaitre. Perhaps he realized this too late. Perhaps the real problem wasn't the equation, but what it revealed about us. About what we are willing to do for control. The equation remains with me. I haven't published it. I haven't shared it. And I don't know if I ever will. Because sometimes, the greatest act of intelligence is knowing when not to move forward. When to stop. When to accept that not everything needs to be solved. And that some mysteries exist to remind us that the unknown has its value, its place, its function. But the matter didn't end there. Days later, I received a new envelope. No return address, no stamp. Inside, a sheet with a symbol I already knew, but which didn't belong to Lemaitre's equation. It was something new. Something that seemed to say, it's not over yet. And if it's not over, then perhaps the last problem wasn't the last. The following morning, while organizing my files, I found an envelope on my desk. It hadn't been there the night before. No return address, no signature. Inside, a sheet of paper with a different symbol. It wasn't part of Lemaitre's equation. It was simpler, but it carried a strange familiarity, as if it were the beginning of something new. The symbol looked like a fusion between a letter and a number, as if defying logic itself. And next to it, a handwritten phrase, "You solved the last problem. Now, start the first." That put me on alert. Who knew I had deciphered the equation? And why would they send me something so enigmatic, so direct? The investigation seemed to have gained a new layer. I connected the symbol to the database I used to decipher patterns and found a partial match. An article published decades ago, by an author who mysteriously disappeared. The topic? The origin of mathematical paradoxes and their relation to human behavior. It was as if someone was guiding me to a new case, a new mystery, a new risk. I looked out the window, trying to understand if it was an invitation or a warning. And as the sun rose, I felt that Lemaitre's equation wasn't the end, it was the portal. A test for something bigger. What if the next problem was already among us, disguised as coincidence, routine, normality? Perhaps the true enigma is yet to come. Some investigations don't end with an arrest or a clear answer. They end with a choice. And that's what this case taught me, that true power lies not in deciphering the mystery, but in deciding what to do with it. Lemaitre's equation wasn't just an intellectual challenge, it was a mirror. A reflection of what we are capable of hiding or revealing. Ultimately, it wasn't about numbers. It was about limits. About what happens when we cross what protects us from what we're not yet ready to understand. And perhaps the greatest enigma lies not in the symbols, but in our own minds. What would you do if you had access to a truth that could change everything? Would you reveal it? Or protect it? This investigation left its mark on me. Not physically, but mentally. And it made me realize that sometimes silence is more powerful than any word. But it also showed me that there are people watching, waiting, testing. And that the next mystery might be hidden in something as simple as a sheet of paper. Or an equation. Or a choice. If this story made you think, if it provoked you in any way, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. There are still many mysteries waiting to be solved. And who knows, the next one might already be watching you.